Well, do have a seat. You need it after that one because that's a bit of a workout for the lungs, isn't it? If you don't cheat and take a breath halfway through the cum. But well done. And now you get to take a little break before we have to stand up again in a few minutes' time. I just want to say a big welcome. I'm Michael, and along with my wife Rebecca, we're part of the church here. And we're really looking forward to Christmas. Now, I wonder if you have a favourite Christmas movie. Christmas isn't really Christmas, is it, without a Christmas movie? I wonder if you've got a favourite. Well, I did a bit of research on the way here. Went on to ChatGPT. And I worked out that the top 5 Christmas movies, apparently, in the UK are Elf, Love Actually, The Holiday, Home Alone, and Die Hard. I know there's a bit of a dispute about Die Hard. Is it a Christmas movie or not? Can a movie about a terrorist attack on a skyscraper be a Christmas movie? We'll see. Anyway, I thought we'd do a little survey tonight, okay, just to see what the definitive favourite of all time, according to St. Luke's, is, okay? So give us a cheer, okay, if this is your favourite Christmas movie. Elf. That was lame, sorry. Don't tell Will Ferrell. Love Actually. Bit louder. The Holiday. 2 of you. Die Hard. Bit of a deeper cheer for Die Hard. And what about Home Alone? I think Home Alone has won it. So there you go. Which is good, because actually it's my favourite Christmas movie. And I don't feel Christmas is quite Christmas without watching at least one of the Home Alone movies. And I'm actually old enough to remember when Home Alone was first released. It was released when I was at school. And I have a bit of a strange relationship with that movie. Because every year, on the last day of term, before we went home for holidays, we would watch Home Alone at school in one of our lessons. The only thing was, Home Alone, it's about an hour and a half, isn't it? It's a movie, but our lessons were only 1 hour long. So we always fast-forwarded, was a video in those days, to the exciting bit. The bit where Kevin is home alone, defending his house from the wet bandits. And so consequently, I'd never seen the beginning, and I'd never seen the end. Just the middle hour of the movie. All those years, year after year. And then many years later, I remember going to a friend's house around Christmas time, and they said, let's watch Home Alone. And so we settled down to watch it, and we watched it, of course, from the start. And I had this kind of aha moment when I suddenly realized for the first time in my life why Kevin was home alone. I mean, all these years, I had thought to myself, there is something strange. I mean, normally 8-year-old boys are not left home alone at Christmas time whilst their family fly to the other side of the world. Now, I know there are some parents who would like to do that, but it's not normally the thing you do, is it? I knew that that was kind of wrong, and I also didn't know what happened at the end. I didn't know whether his mother ever made it home. And finally, I got to see the story in context. It all began to make sense for the first time in my life. And I thought, you know, the kind of relationship I have with Home Alone is perhaps the kind of relationship that many of us have with the Christmas story. And that is, we're kind of familiar with lots of aspects of the Christmas story. We know about Mary and Joseph and the main characters, the shepherds and the wise men and the angels. And we know the claim is that the baby is God become man. And we hear the angels declaring that it's good news of great joy for all people. And maybe you've heard that in carol services year after year. Maybe you've seen it acted out in nativity scenes year after year. But maybe you've been forgiven for thinking, is it really good news? Does it really give you great joy? Do you really think this is for everyone? And actually, maybe one of our problems with the Christmas story, a bit like my problem with Home Alone, is actually Christmas is not the beginning of the story. If you get a Bible and look for the Christmas story, you'll find that actually the story of Jesus' birth is not at the beginning. It actually comes about 3/4 of the way through the Bible. You see, the Christmas story is part of a bigger story, and the only way we can understand what's going on in the Christmas story is to know how the bigger story began. And actually, right back at the beginning of the bigger story of the whole Bible, we read that God makes a world that's good, a world without suffering or pain and death. And God creates people to enjoy that world and to enjoy each other and to enjoy him. And then he gives them this choice to live in that world the way it was designed to be lived, with him at the center, or to live in it on their own way. And he gave them that choice because he loved them and he loves us, and choice and love go together. And the tragedy we read in the story is that people took that choice and they chose, as it were, like Kevin, to become home alone. Remember at the beginning of the movie, he thinks basically that life would be so much better off without his parents. And so often we can kind of feel that life might be better off without God. And so implicitly or explicitly we try to live, as it were, without him. And yet the Bible says that that event that happened in history and also happens in a sense in all of our lives actually has led to everything going wrong. The good world we live in is not the way it's meant to be. The beautiful world we live in has become broken, and nothing is quite what it's meant to be. Now, I know we might have questions about that story from the book of Genesis, about when it happened and exactly how it happens. We can talk about that later if you want. But can I say this? I think this story makes sense of our experience of life. Because as we look at our world around us and we think about our lives, don't we also get a sense that things are not the way they're meant to be? That something's gone wrong? I mean, you kind of get that at Christmas, don't you? You know, think about the perfect image of Christmas. It's on every Christmas cards. It's in every Christmas movie. The perfect Christmas has 3 ingredients, doesn't it? It starts with beautiful weather. Snow, okay? Secondly, it involves delicious food and lots of it. And thirdly, Christmas always has to involve happy and harmonious families who are getting on with each other. That's what Christmas is meant to be like, isn't it? What is Christmas actually like? Well, for a start, it's not going to snow, is it? It's going to probably rain on Christmas Day and be grey and kind of damp. That's what a British Christmas is like. You know, if you're hoping for a white Christmas, dream on. Okay, it's not going to happen. Secondly, what about the food? Have you ever wondered why we have turkey on Christmas Day? I mean, like, at any other point in the year, does anyone go for a roast turkey? They don't, do they? Do you know why? Because it's not very nice, okay? Roast beef, roast chicken, roast lamb, any other roast is better than roast turkey. Why do we have the driest, most tasteless meat on Christmas Day? And then we add to it Brussels sprouts. I mean, if the raw ingredients of your best meal of the year are turkey and Brussels sprouts, you've got to be a very good chef, haven't you, to make that pretty good. So that's the food. And then what about families? Well, there's often the dispute, isn't there, of who to see and when. And actually, seriously, there's the sadness, isn't there, of the people we can't see because they're no longer with us. And perhaps we feel that absence more at Christmas than any other moment in the year. And then there's the battle of getting on with the people that we have to see. And that can be difficult. You know, there was a survey done a few years ago that tracks that in the average British household on Christmas Day, there are at least 5 arguments, okay? Not only did they work out how many arguments there are, they also worked out when they're likely to happen, okay? So, on Thursday, be warned. The first one is likely to happen at 10:13 in the morning. The second, at 12:24. It's very precise, isn't it? Apparently, that one is an argument over the presents. At 2:30, there'll be an argument over why the Christmas dinner is taking so long to cook. At 6:05, there'll be an argument over what to watch on television. And then at 10:15 in the evening, there'll be an argument probably fueled by a bit too much mulled wine or other beverages. 5 arguments on Christmas Day. But the point is this, isn't it? You know, we have this image of what Christmas is meant to be like, and then our experience of what it's actually like. That's a bit like life, isn't it? We all have this sense of what life is meant to be like, but then we have our experience of what life's actually like. And actually, if the Bible story is true, it makes sense of that, doesn't it? Because the beginning of the story says we live in a good world and it's gone wrong. And things are not meant to be this way. Something's gone wrong. But wonderfully, that's not the end of the story. If it was the end of the story, the Bible would be a very short book. It would be 3 chapters long. But even in the 3rd chapter of the Bible, there's this promise that one day God would come to step in, to sort it out, to come into this broken and dark world, do something about it. And then as you read through the first part of the Bible, the bit we call the Old Testament, we have these promises and these prophecies about what this person would be like and what would happen. And then you get to a period where there's 400 years and then nothing seems to be happening. And it feels like God has forgotten all of those promises. And then you get to Christmas night, and the shepherds on a hillside, and a baby is born. And Christmas says God has not forgotten. That even though the world we live in is not the way it's meant to be, God has stepped into the darkness. He's not left us, abandoned us, but he became part of this world because he loves us. Now, I know that claim of Christmas, the claim that God became a human being and lived on planet Earth, is a difficult one, perhaps for some people to get their head around. I've got friends who are atheists, and they would say things like, well, I can't believe that a baby was God, because, of course, I don't believe in God in the first place. And, of course, if there is no God and there is nothing more to this world than what we can see and touch, then, of course, the idea that God could become human is crazy to believe, isn't it? But I guess my question is, how do we know? How do we know that there isn't a God or anything more to this world than what we can see and touch? There was a lady called Ayaan Hirsi Ali who, for many years, was a very convinced atheist. She was a colleague of perhaps the world's most famous atheist, a man called Richard Dawkins. She traveled the world speaking about how she didn't believe in God until a couple of years ago, she shocked the world and her friend Richard Dawkins when she said that she had become a follower of Jesus. And so they did a discussion in New York, Richard and Ayaan, and they discussed this question. And Richard Dawkins says to her, how can you believe this crazy story that there's a God who could become a human being and live on earth and do miracles and die on a cross and rise from the dead? Isn't that ridiculous? And she said, Richard, I used to think that was ridiculous because I thought there was nothing more out there. But now I've come to realize there could be something more. And when you think that there could be something more, it's not as ridiculous as you first think. You know, I've got other friends, and they struggle with the Christmas story for a different reason. I've got friends who are Muslims. And it's not that, of course, they don't believe in God. They do. But the idea that God could become human, that doesn't seem like the kind of thing that God should do. Isn't God too big, too holy, too perfect to get involved in our messy and dirty and broken worlds? There's a guy called Nabil Qureshi who grew up as a committed and convinced Muslim until he discovered himself the claims of Jesus. And he once used an analogy that I found so helpful. I'll try and kind of make it a Leicester analogy, shall I? Imagine you're walking down by the River Soar in Leicester, and you fall in. And you're in the water, and you're kind of floundering around, and you shout, help, help, I'm drowning. And there are two people on the riverbank, both of them very smartly dressed. And you shout, help, help, I'm drowning. And the first one looks at you and says, well, I'm really sorry. I'm too smartly dressed, and I'm on my way to an important meeting. I can't do anything about this situation. The second person, though, doesn't wait to be asked twice. He strips off his shirt and tie, kicks off his shoes, jumps into the water, and drags you to the bank and to safety. Now, the question is this. Which of those two people was the greatest? The one that was too important to come in to rescue you, or the one who was willing to do it? And actually, which is a greater picture of God? A God who is too important to come into our world, or a God who is big enough to become small and strong enough to become weak? I was reading a book recently by a lady called Lamorna Ash. She, like many people in the UK at the moment, is on a spiritual journey. And her book kind of recounts the journey that she's been going on as she's been turning up at church and starting to read the Bible. And in the conclusion, she's still got all these kind of questions and doubts about everything. But she said something I just thought was so beautiful. She said this: I believe that God might have come to earth 2,000 years ago to walk alongside us and to help us with our terrible pain. Why? Because I can't imagine of a more beautiful story of how a God would behave. Can't imagine of a more beautiful story about how a God would behave. What if it was true? What if the story of Christmas was true, that actually God would become one of us? Because although the world we live in is not the way it's meant to be, God didn't want to leave it that way. And wonderfully, the Christmas story is not the beginning of the story, it's also not the end of the story, of course. It's not the end of the story of Jesus' life. In fact, we've got dotted around the church some copies of one of the accounts of Jesus' life, and we'd love you to take it away if you've never done that and have a read of it yourself. Not just of how it began, but his life and then his death and his resurrection. But of course, this Christmas story is not the end of the story of the Bible either. The very last book of the Bible, a book called Revelation, finishes with this amazing picture of how the Jesus that came 2,000 years ago will one day come again and finally and fully sort out our broken worlds and put an end to injustice and evil and pain and suffering. It's an amazing picture of tears being wiped away and everything sad becoming untrue. Because the world we live in is not the way it's meant to be, but wonderfully it's not the way it one day will be when we look at the big story. I guess you might have one final question, and that is, if it's true that one day God could sort out our broken worlds, why doesn't he do it now? Why doesn't he just step in rather than leaving us going year after year in this dark world? And I think the answer is not that God doesn't care, but because he does. But that the problems of our world are not just out there, are they? The problems in our world are also in here. The brokenness we experience in our world is also a brokenness in all of our lives. Did you hear the story about the boy who wanted a bike for Christmas? And he really, really wanted this bike for Christmas. And so he decided he would pray, okay? Not suggesting, kids, that prayer necessarily will get the presents you want, but he thought, I will pray. And so he prayed and he said, God, I want a bike for Christmas. And then he thought to himself, you know what I'll do? I'll do a deal with God. Now, I'm not sure whether that's a thing I would want to suggest, but he says, I'll do a deal. I'll say, God, if I can be good until Christmas, will you give me a bike? And so he prays that, and he goes to sleep, and the next morning he gets up, and he has an argument with his sister. And he says, oh no, just blown it, haven't I? One day. So that night he goes to bed, and he prays again, and he says, okay, God, if I can be good for a week, will you give me a bike for Christmas? The next morning he gets up, he's very nice to his sister, and then he has an argument with his mum. He says, oh no, I've blown it again. So that night, he gets on his bed and he prays again. He says, okay, God, if I can be good for one day, will you give me a bike? Next morning, he gets up. He's really nice to his sister. He's really nice to his mum. He gets to school and he falls out with his teacher. And he's, oh no, really blown it. And so he gets home that night and he thinks, well, this really isn't working out very well, is it? I need to come up with a plan B. And he's walking around the house. He sees the nativity scene on the mantelpiece. There's Mary and Joseph and so on. And he comes up with this idea. He takes the statue of the Virgin Mary and he shoves it up his jumper and he runs upstairs and he hides it at the back of the cupboards. And then he goes back to his bed and he prays again and he says, dear God, if you want to see your mother again, give me a bike. Now, I'm not sure that is advisable, but it does teach us a lesson, doesn't it? And that is, we're not very good at being good, are we? You know, we try our hardest and yet we fail. We fail to live up to our own standards and let alone God's. And the problems of our world are also problems that we experience in our own lives. And if God was going to sort out our world, what about the stuff in our lives that needs sorting out? And that's why Jesus came. Not to rub it in, but to rub it out. Not to condemn us, but to give us the opportunity of experiencing his forgiveness and a fresh start. And the new life that he wants to offer with him at the center, and the hope, ultimately, that we can be with him in a world made new. Now, I don't know what you think about all this. Maybe you're here tonight, and maybe you're quite skeptical about what I've said. If that is you, can I just say we're really glad that you're here. Thank you so much for coming. I've been willing to take part this evening. But if you are skeptical, can I encourage you, why not take one of those accounts of the life of Jesus and read it. Why not check it out for yourself and say, what do I make of this? And what if this was true? What difference would it make? Maybe you're here tonight and you're interested, you're intrigued, but you'd love to find out more. Well, can I just say, you're really welcome to keep coming. Don't just feel like you can only come at Christmas. You're welcome any and every Sunday through the year. There's so much going on. And the church would love to help you discover more about what this is all about. But actually, can I say, finally, the invitation of Christmas is actually the invitation to become part of the story. That just as Jesus came into the world 2,000 years ago, he can also come into our lives and change our lives. We sang a carol earlier, didn't we? A little town of Bethlehem. And the last verse of that carol has a prayer. O holy child of Bethlehem, descend to us, we pray, cast out our sin and enter in, be born in us today. And actually I suggest that would be a great prayer, wouldn't it? Maybe for some of us to pray. Maybe for the first time. And so I'm going to finish just with that short prayer. And maybe in your hearts, you might want to echo the words of that song as a prayer of inviting this Jesus into your heart and life to bring you that hope and that joy and that transformation that only Jesus can bring. Let me pray. O holy child of Bethlehem, descend to me, I pray. Cast out my sin and enter in. Be born in me today. Amen.